What's up, YouTube? I'm Phil Tucker, and this is Shade Tree Therapy. And today I just wanted to hop on here and react to my first blog, The Complicated Relationship Between the Black Community and Mental Health. As I'm doing more things publicly to support the mental health of the Black community in particular, I think it's important for me to clarify my position so that as we're exploring different topics and I'm responding to different things, it's really clear, where that's coming from. And so this is the first blog that I've released to explore some of that and unpack some of that. And so today I'm just going to be reacting to it to share some of my thoughts as I see fit. So let's dive right in.
Mental health. The complicated relationship between the Black community and mental health. 5 reasons I will always be a shade tree therapist. I've come upon something that disturbs me deeply. We have fought hard and long for integration, as I believe we should have, and I know that we will win. But I've come to believe we're integrating into a burning house. Drive. Martin Luther King Jr. The house is on fire and we're in denial. In his memoir, the late singer, actor and civil rights activist, Harry Belafonte recalls a conversation he had with his friend Drive. Martin Luther King Jr. Shortly before his assassination, in which King expressed his concern that the struggle for integration was not enough to address the deeper issues of poverty and injustice in America. King compared America to a burning house that was losing its moral vision, and urged Belafonte to be aware of the dangers of integrating into a society that did not care for the poor and disenfranchised. Being the activist that he was, Belafonte emphasized the need for Black America to take responsibility for its own future, and not rely on political parties or oppressive institutions, suggesting that Black America may be the ones who can save the burning house. The sentiment is fitting for the state of our nation's mental health as well. As devastating as the COVID-19 pandemic has been globally, it has also presented unique opportunities for reflection and course correction of various forms. Post-traumatic growth is a thing after all. The pandemic has not only increased public discourse and the demand for mental health services, but also exposed vulnerabilities in our healthcare system and highlighted a limited perspective of mental health. In America, the recognition of mental health as a critical concern calls for a radical evolution of the field itself due to a history that is marred with social and economic injustice. The integrity of our institutions has been compromised by a failure to honestly address past crimes against humanity for which America has never been held accountable. Additionally, our focus on pathology and illness has hindered our culture's ability to engage in consistent and proactive mental health strategies. In the last 3 years I have been invited to speak to various organizations about mental health. I am deeply humbled any time I have an opportunity to advocate for the mental health of my community. The excitement gives me butterflies no matter the size of the group or how many times I speak. However, as I've participated in these events, I have noticed a disheartening pattern. The conversations consistently center around mental illness rather than mental health. Discussions focus on symptoms, diagnoses, and treatment, leaving little room for exploring the proactive aspects of mental well-being. Despite the growing interest in mental health, the prevailing mindset is fixated on addressing problems rather than fostering resilience and growth. Even worse, these conversations rarely include historical and economic context, which is especially problematic when addressing the Black community.
So right here, I just want to point out that I don't mention this in the blog, but there's a book written by a guy named Dr. Gabor Mate. It's called The Myth of Normal. Trauma, illness, and healing in a toxic culture. In that book, he's really calling into question a lot of the things that we consider to be normal within Western culture that actually is inconsistent with what human beings in general need to thrive. So when you think about our position in America as Black people, as sort of this designated permanent underclass, when you look at policies and things like that, if we're already in what is really largely a toxic culture, that's even more problematic for us as Black people. So if you haven't heard of that book, look it up. It's a really good read. And again, it mentions some things in there about race and class, but in general, it's calling into question just Western culture in general and a lot of the things that we consider to be normal that's just toxic to what human beings need.
My relationship with the mental health care landscape in America has always been tricky, particularly at the institutional level. Even during graduate school, as I pursued my goal of becoming a therapist, I felt increasingly agitated and unsatisfied by the thought of it. It was during a conversation with my tattoo artist, Stevie, while getting some work done that the underlying source of my unease became clear. The result was the name of my private counseling practice and personal philosophy, Shade Tree Therapy. It is rooted in providing a safe and inclusive space for individuals to discover their resilience, embrace personal growth, and build thriving relationships while challenging the limitations of traditional mental health care. In this blog, I will share the 5 main reasons I will always consider myself a shade tree therapist. 1. Culture. Without power there is no life. We need to organize our consciousness and our personalities and our culture and see them as instruments of power, and use them as instruments of power to transform our situation. Dr. Amos Wilson. I believe that in order to create a world where communities prioritize the emotional and mental well-being of all people, art and cultural practices are of the utmost importance. I was recently blown away by the Culture is Our Weapon, Cultural Organizing 101 workshop through People's Hub. Joe Tolbert Jr., who is a friend and fellow Knoxvillian, was the host. It was both exciting and overwhelming to hear someone who grew up in the same little East TN town I did lead an international workshop about cultural organizing. I suspect, like most people, I had taken the power of culture for granted. As he shared some of his personal experiences, I was perceiving our shared culture, and culture in the general sense, in an entirely new way. In a powerful way. Simultaneously on a micro and macro level. I imagine it was like the cultural version of the discovery of the Higgs boson, aka the God particle, which confirmed the presence of the Higgs field. Scientists basically crashed protons together so hard that the field around them shifted. Imagine if we were living in water but didn't know it because couldn't perceive the water, and then one day the water moved. It's like that. But I'm no quantum physicist, so take that with a grain of salt. It's wild to think that the same culture that created young Jeezy, Mr. Snowman himself, also produced Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The absolute truth. Yeah, I'm no joke. Who me? I emerged from the crack smoke. Yeah. In the hearts of those who grind with O's. They feel my pain, they at my shows. Young Jeezy, Thug Motivation 101. Both men are descendants of the African diaspora, American descendants of slavery, ADOS, from Atlanta, Georgia, if we want to get really specific. One strived to be the living embodiment of the trap, while the other is a revolutionary, who sacrificed his life for the betterment of humanity. Both are equally blatty black. I've never sold crack, but there was definitely a period of my life where Thug Motivation 101 was the soundtrack for my life. Anyone from my generation will tell you that a Young Jeezy / Manny Fresh collaboration is hard to beat. Boom boom clap. I'm just saying. Dr. Amos Wilson, a prominent African-American social theorist, psychologist, and author who wrote about the psychology of the Black experience in America, believed that culture is the key to producing cures for the problems facing its people. He argued that by drawing upon the knowledge, practices, and values of their cultural heritage, people can find solutions to the challenges they face. Dr. Wilson defined culture as the totality of values, beliefs, behaviors, customs, and artifacts that are transmitted from generation to generation within a particular society, describing it as a sort of living entity that serves as a buffer between people and their environment. According to Wilson, a healthy culture is one that helps its people solve problems and meet their needs. Therefore, a culture that does not serve these two vital functions is toxic. However, just as a culture can produce aspects that are harmful, it can also produce remedies. If Dr. Wilson's assertions are correct, it is critical that we seriously analyze our culture for the medicines emerging to heal its people. We may be surprised by what we find.
And that's really the point there. It isn't to beat up on, rap culture or anything like that. The point is that I think if we're intentional about looking for ways in which we can use the culture to solve our problems and meet our needs, and we keep that at the forefront, then our culture can be a powerful tool that we can use to really improve our condition. So regardless of where you fall in terms of your particular expression within the culture, or where you might be in terms of social status or socioeconomic status, the point is, are we being intentional and making sure that we are creating things that solve problems and, you know, meet our needs in ways that are sustainable. I think that's what's key, is that intentionality piece.
Find. 2. Trust. Won't it be wonderful when Black history and Native American history and Jewish history and all of US history is taught from one book? Just US history. Maya Angelou. Trust is one of the fundamental requirements of good therapy. We have to be real about where we are and how we got here as a society. Despite being a licensed professional, I admit that I still have a serious distrust of the mental health field. I can vividly recall sitting in an undergraduate child development psych course watching an old video where a Black infant was being used to test grip strength. The way the researchers were manhandling this child pissed me off to my core. Nobody else seemed fazed by it. The more I learned, the more I was reminded of why people I knew either fixed their own cars or took them to a shade tree mechanic. Trust was a bigger motivation than the money. Therapy isn't much different. I remember my aunt having a long dispute with a man named Huckabuck over some work he did. As his name suggests, you had to be savvy when dealing with him. Still, many people in the community preferred him over the dealership. I hope I'm not dry snitching, but the guys who really stood out were the ones who worked at dealerships as certified mechanics during the day but ran their own side gigs in the evenings and weekends. Some were mobile, going wherever the work took them, while others had their own garages. These folks were skilled, hardworking, and truly passionate about what they did. And most importantly, they were down-to-earth educators. In between running back and forth to AutoZone for parts, I learned some things. These were qualities I found to be missing in the supposed mental health founding fathers I learned about. I hear people talk all the time about this so-called mental health stigma. I call BS on that. The World Health Organization defines mental health as a state of well-being in which the individual realizes their own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their community. There isn't.
So I want to make a point there. So when you look at that definition of mental health, according to the World Health Organization, a state of well-being in which an individual realizes their own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their community. Look at that definition, and then I want you to look at the timeline of Black life in America. Hell, you can look at the formal apology that was issued by Congress back in 2008, and what you'll see is a pattern of the system itself, our government itself, directly opposing each one of those aspects of mental health. So I want to underline that point. And there's never been, in my opinion, appropriate action taken to remedy that, right? So those are specific harms that have been caused directly, against our mental health as a people that has not been addressed. So, full stop, period, right there.
Isn't anything stigmatizing about any of that? The real issue lies with the system and the culture. Dr. Wilson asserted that, in the context of a racist social system, psychological diagnosis, labeling and treatment of the behavior of politically oppressed persons are political acts performed to attain political ends. If oppression is to operate with maximum efficiency, it must become and remain a psychological condition achieving self-perpetuating motion by its own internal dynamics and by its own inertial momentum. I have to agree and suggest that maybe this is the real stigma. If so, wouldn't distrust be a valid and expected response when you take into account the gross ways in which psychiatry has facilitated the dehumanization of various oppressed peoples? Not just blacks. We aren't as far away from the use of asylums, lobotomies, and forced sterilization to deal with undesirable citizens as we would like to believe. The American Psychological Association, APA, issued a formal apology to people of color for its role in promoting, perpetuating, and failing to challenge racism, racial discrimination, and human hierarchy in the US as recently as October of 2021. More on that later.
Just like that apology from Congress that I mentioned, most people don't know that the APA even issued an apology in the first place. And so if you go to the original blog, I actually linked their apology, and you can go and read that on your own time, but it's pretty interesting.
I struggled to relate to figures like Sigmund Freud, hailed as the father of psychoanalysis, or B.F. Skinner, a pioneer of behaviorism. Their approaches to therapy made the process seem more like a detached scientific experiment than a transformative experience. And that old school image of a therapist, some older white dude with a white beard, analyzing everything you say while you lie on a couch, submitting to the authority of their interpretations. Nah, I wanted no parts of that. It just didn't resonate with my spirit. My perspective often differed from my classmates, seemingly because of my experiences as a black man. Our cultures shaped how we saw the world, but this was seldom taken into account. And it would have been mutually beneficial if our differences were acknowledged and challenged in the curriculum. But nope, the curriculum was overwhelmingly white by default. I don't recall any mention of a single black clinician throughout my entire education. In an effort to address this void, this year I challenged myself to share the stories of black pioneers in mental health on Facebook for Black History Month. Each day, I introduced a new figure. I easily highlighted 28 revolutionary black mental health professionals, many of whom I had never heard of before. In the case of Dr. Kenneth Clark and his wife Dr. Mamie Clark, I was familiar with their groundbreaking doll test work from graduate school, but it had been attributed to a white colleague. Unbeknownst to me, their research had been instrumental in the landmark Brown v. Board of Education case, demonstrating the detrimental effects of segregation on black children. That exercise was eye-opening. I learned so much about the contributions of black mental health professionals, and the Association of Black Psychologists, ABPSI. Man, if I had learned about them earlier in my education, my perspective on the field and my place in it would have been so much broader. I suspect other disciplines similarly exclude the work of black professionals, contributing to the false notion of white supremacy. Their absence suggests that black people have not made meaningful contributions, when in reality they've simply been excluded. I never even questioned the deficit of people who looked like me in the curriculum. It's embarrassing to admit now, but it just didn't cross my mind. That's really the insidiousness of systemic racism, especially white supremacy. As Chris Rock once said, everything is alright as long as it's all white. 3.
Yeah, and the point there that I just want to highlight is the fact that when you're in it and you're just trying to get through, you're just trying to survive and get your degree, and you're dealing with all the stuff that comes with that, you're not thinking about what's missing from the equation. You got enough stuff on your plate to contend with just to get the work done. You know what I mean? So even myself, like I became a therapist because I wanted to come back to the black community and address some of the things that I saw, plaguing the people I cared about. That was the point. So even somebody who intentionally went into that, went into academia with that goal, I still found myself unaware of the ways that we were simply missing from the education itself. And I think that says a lot about just the way the system is designed and how insidious and powerful that false notion of white supremacy, really is. Because I just never even questioned that we were missing. I had no idea that there were so many black clinicians that it contributed to the field of mental health. Not just for black people, just the field as a whole. It's kind of crazy to think about.
3. Sacred space. At first you might find that nothing happens there. But if you have a sacred space and use it, eventually something will happen. Your sacred space is where you find yourself again and again. Joseph Campbell. Like car repairs, therapy cannot be confined to a sanctioned location. Sacred space is one of the most important, but seldom talked about, components of therapy. A sacred space is distinguished from other spaces by its ability to provide a means of access between ordinary life and what we might call transcendent experiences. There is a focus on the forms, objects, and actions within the space that reveals them as conduits for meaning and purpose. This high degree of intentionality is a catalyst for transformation. If you aren't into tattoos, you may not know that tattoo shops are a sacred space for people who are a part of deep tattoo culture. A lot of healing and growth can happen during the process of getting a tattoo. People inject more than ink into themselves when they get work done. A good tattoo is a life thing driven by meaning and purpose. Each detail is a small contribution to the storyteller's account of the human experience. When I slow down and really look at the work I've had done, I'm visited by the previous versions of myself who left their experiences behind for me to remember, preserve, learn from, and share with others. Church folk call that a testimony. I don't remember exactly what we were talking about, But at some point, Stevie responded to something I said and referred to me as a therapist. The comment made me cringe a little. He was being endearing. He knew I was almost finished with my master's program, and how hard I had worked. He also knew about my desire to use my new skills to help the community that raised me. I responded with, "If I'm a therapist, I'm a shade tree therapist." We both smirked. The next time I came into the shop, Stevie greeted me with shade tree. "What's up my $% and?" It was on from there. It was like the movie Inception, but instead of a dream within a dream, it was a sacred space giving birth to a sacred space. Not only that, but anyone who has worked with me will tell you that I stress the skill of being able to recognize and create sacred spaces in the seemingly mundane places of life. They're everywhere once you know what to look for. Ever since then, shade tree therapy has been my attempt to integrate Black culture and the best the field of mental health has to offer in order to serve the upliftment of Black people and humanity at large. As it turns out, Black culture, like all cultures, has plenty to offer the evolution of humanity. 4. Equity. I want to help advance equity in mental health care. I don't see a path forward where we, as a society, are able to realize the heights of human potential that does not include reconciling present-day policies and institutions with history. Because the truth is, labels like black and white alike are caricatures that divorce us from our humanity. While they suggest very different socio-economic and political realities, both fall short of personhood, despite volumes and volumes of scientific racism that would suggest otherwise. We all suffer as a result. The APA's apology was based on historical research and listening sessions that revealed the long-term impact of the APA's failures as an association, a discipline, and as individual psychologists. The organization pledged to take action to dismantle systemic racism, advance health equity, and reconcile and heal with communities of color.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, like, I just don't understand, like, how can you admit that you've engaged in that kind of harm, but then position yourself as being the dominant voice in remedying that harm? It makes no sense.
Ironically, their resolutions did not include supporting ABPSI, the country's first and oldest Black mental health care institution. The apology fell short in effectively addressing the APA's role in promoting white supremacy, which has relentlessly impeded the full expression of Black life. ABPSI formally rejected the APA's apology in November of 2021 via their official statement to the APA apology on the grounds that it was an unacceptable symbolic gesture, rather than a measure of progress toward economic equity and real justice. Still, almost 2 years later, as the conversation about mental health is still going strong, the silence regarding race and mental health has been deafening. And the mental health of our nation is suffering because of it. As Dr. John Henrik Clarke put it, race tells you how you look, but it doesn't tell you who you are. I'm hopeful that the mental health conversation will mature to center realizing human potential and well-being in the not-so-distant future. Neuroscience, for example, is still a relatively young field. I'm constantly in awe of the things we're learning about the inner workings of the mind. There's just so much we don't know. In the meantime, I'm doing my best to keep one foot in the Black community and the other in a post-race future where humanity works collectively to care for our world and each other. To my surprise, Black culture is filled with examples for doing so. 3 traditions that I've been captivated by are Black psychology, Afrofuturism, and Afrosurrealism. 5. Resilience and relationship. The tagline for shade tree therapy is life rooted in resilience and relationship, and the logo is a tree with a double helix for a trunk and a pronounced root system. It has a very Sankofa-esque quality to it. For those who don't know, Sankofa is a word and a symbol from some African languages and cultures, like Akan and Twi. It means go back and get it, and it tells us to learn from our past and our ancestors. The symbol is a bird that looks back while moving forward, showing that we can use the past to shape the future. If you cut a tree, rings inside the trunk serve as a historical record of the tree's growth and environmental conditions. Each ring represents a year of growth, with the width and characteristics of the rings indicating variations in climate, precipitation, and overall health of the tree throughout its lifespan. Think of the shade tree therapy tree as a family tree, the family tree of humanity, the tree of life, or maybe some combination. This blog has emerged as a response to the limitations and shortcomings of traditional mental health care. I recognize the importance of addressing historical and systemic injustices and aim to help forge a pathway towards a future where mental health is prioritized, collective well-being is nurtured, and cultural practices are valued as essential tools for healing and growth. By integrating Black culture and embracing the principles of equity, culture, and resilience, it is my intention to uplift Black people and contribute to the evolution of mental health practices and our society.
All right. So if this is something that you find interesting, you can find the actual blog in its entirety over on medium.com. I'll link it in the description. Over there, I'll be writing about just different things that I think are interesting or, and helpful to the conversation around Black mental health. So I'm Phil. This is Shade Tree Therapy, and I appreciate you for joining, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.